and welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we're doing a little bit of a luxurious dish for you. This is a lobster and seafood bisque. Now we're doing sort of a modern take on this. It's not the really traditional version, and I'll explain why as we go through the recipe, but it is absolutely delicious, very richly seafood, and here's our ingredients. So we've got these beautiful lobster tails, that's where we're starting. We also have a bunch of leftover seafood shells. We're going to be using some heavy cream, some tomato paste, bay leaf, some garlic, some thyme, some parsley, some leek, we have frozen leeks, carrot, green onion, and celery. We're going to be using some water. You can also use fish stock for this, butter and flour for a roux, 1 onion. We're also going to be adding some cognac as well as some sherry to this. So to get started, we're just going to get all of our mise en place ready, and we're going to start with our veggies. So we're going to take our garlic. We're just going to leave these whole and let them cook so we get that nice sweet roasted garlic flavor, and you don't get a lot of sharpness out of it. We want to make this sort of a nice round flavor mostly. Here's our leeks. Now we usually buy leeks when they're very, very fresh in the summer, and then we freeze them. It makes them very easy to cut, and they stay for a long, long time. They're very easy to use. It also sort of tenderizes them when they freeze. We're also going to chop up our carrots. Now, we're going to eventually be mixing, burr mixing all of this, so we want pretty small pieces so that long threads of celery stalk don't get wrapped up in our stick blender. But also we want everything to sort of melt together in this as well, so pretty small pieces for all of these. Same with our carrot. We're going to cut that into halves and make pretty thin slices of that so that they all cook very, very well. And then we are also going to do the same with the parsley. For the same reason, we don't want long parsley stalks or anything to get caught on our burr mixer. Now, we have a very serious stick blender. This recipe actually requires something more like a food processor or a very serious blender, because we're going to be blending up some of those lobster and crab shells with the soup. Parsley goes in there as well. And the last thing we need to do vegetable-wise is get our onion ready. So we're going to chop that into a pretty wide dice. And there's all of our nice aromatic veggies to go into the soup. So we have about a quart of vegetables here. We're going to use about a quart of water to go with that. And you can use fish stock for that as well. And then we're going to get our lobster ready. So we want to prepare this at the beginning because we're going to be using these shells for flavor. And we're going to use the meat at the very, very end. So what we're doing here is we're just going to cut this up. We're going to cut it in half and then cut the lobster tail into basically chunks, one for each leg. And we're going to remove the meat from the shell. Want to make sure you have a good, solid, pretty heavy and very sharp knife for this. And we're just going to pull the meat out. And we're going to set that aside. Probably a good idea to leave that in the fridge. You want to leave it as intact as possible. We're going to fry this up and use it as basically a garnish at the end. So pull that beautiful, beautiful fresh lobster meat out of there. And just put that in a bowl covered in the fridge and leave that while you're getting your bisque to cook. So here's where we're going to start with the roux. Now, as I said earlier, this is sort of a non-traditional bisque. The bisque is typically or traditionally thickened with a paste made from the lobster and crab shells as well as rice. Now, we are going to be thickening this with a roux, which is more in line with how it is typically done today. We have a lot of soup to thicken, so it's going to be a lot of roux. So we've added our flour to our melted butter, and we're just going to stir that together and let it foam a little bit. And we want a very pale roux. We don't want to get a lot of color. It has to be very, very blonde for this. We don't want it to be darkened We don't want a whole lot of that toasty flavor. We just want this to thicken the soup. So you can see here, the foaming is just sort of finishing here, so the flour is almost cooked. It's still foaming up a little. And then when you get to sort of this texture, the foaming has slowed down a little bit and it's getting a little bit, almost a little bit blonde. We're going to add in our vegetables, along with the raw lobster shells from the fresh lobster. So we're going to add the other one, the leftover shells that I showed you at the beginning. We're going to add that later, but they've already been cooked, so we don't need to cook them at all. We're going to add the raw ones first. And you can see almost immediately they start to get pink where they're getting heat. So we're just going to let that roll around in there with the roux for just a couple of minutes, letting it get a little bit cooked. And there you go. You see they're already getting very, very pink where they've gotten direct heat. And now we're starting to see some of that roux turn into a fond at the bottom of the pan, along with the juices from those lobster shells. So what we want to do is get our vegetables in now, along with the bay leaf and the thyme sprigs. So those are all going to go in. We're going to add a little bit of salt as well. And a lot of juices are going to come out of those veggies, and we're going to use that to sort of deglaze the bottom of the pan a little bit and make sure that the roux doesn't stick and burn. And all those nice vegetable juices are going to start sort of deglazing the bottom of the pan of all of that roux. You can see those beautiful lobster shells in there. We're also going to add a little bit of tomato paste. Now, if you remember, we used tomato paste frequently when we were doing stocks. Now, for this recipe, we are just going to be using water, but you can also use a seafood stock or a shrimp stock for this. And if you can find tomato paste in a tube, it is much more convenient than those little cans that you open and then use 3 tablespoons of and then throw the rest away. There we go. Everything in there is getting nice and cooked. The next thing we're going to add is our liquor. So there's about the fair amount, honestly, is a 1/4 cup of the cognac and a 1/4 cup of the sherry. Now don't worry, the alcohol is all going to boil off from this, and you're just going to be left with that amazing flavor at the end. The sherry is quite sweet, so it adds this beautiful light sweetness. The cognac has a really interesting complexity, and they add a lot of flavor to this dish. Also, another great way to deglaze the bottom of your pan is with that alcohol. We're going to add some of the water, again, just to scrape up anything that might be sticking to the bottom. Definitely want to be careful of that roux. You don't want it to burn. And there goes the rest of the water. Here's where we're going to add the leftover lobster and crab shells that we had just sitting in our freezer from a previous meal. So we had these, we had ordered some or had made some, and we just had some leftover shells. This is a perfect application for this because we're just going to toss it in the soup, and those are going to get burr mixed in with all of those veggies. So we're going to cover that for a while and let it all simmer together. And you can see it has gotten very, very thick. So we're going to pull out the things that we don't want to eat, which is, at this point, the thyme sprigs, the stems, and the bay leaf. So hopefully you can find the bay leaf without too much difficulty. It's usually pretty close to the top. We found ours pretty fast. And you don't want to burr mix those. You don't want those in your final soup. And you can see how thick it's gotten from just that roux. But we're going to make it thicker by grinding up the shells of the lobster and crab that are in there. So it's going to add not only a lot of flavor, but it's also going to help thicken the soup. Now, as I said earlier, we have a very serious stick blender. This is a Bamex, which has a really, really powerful motor. We don't recommend using a stick blender for this for most home kitchens. But if you have a pretty serious blender or a food processor, that is a great use. Those would be perfect for this soup. So you can see here, there's no more big chunks left. All the veggies have been burr mixed together. It's still very, very thick. It's actually gotten a little bit thicker from the addition of all those shells. And you can see a lot of bits of shell. Don't worry about that. We are going to strain this soup. It's a lot of work. This soup does involve a little bit of patience. And here we are. We're just going to strain this. We've got a nice fine strainer. And we're just going to get all of those sort of bigger chunks of shell out. And just push it through with a spatula. And you can see how that beautiful, really rich and thick bisque already has an amazing silky texture. And we're getting rid of all those bits of shell. And there we go. So this is the last of it going through the strainer. And you can see how beautiful and rich that is. It's already got that beautiful silky texture, and we haven't even added the cream yet. So the lobster meat is come out of the fridge. We're going to give this a really quick little marinade with a tiny bit of vermouth, some salt and pepper. And just give that a little stir. Then we're just going to really quickly dredge this in a mixture of flour and dried mustard and fry it in butter. So we're going to have these beautiful little dumplings, essentially made of lobster fried in butter. And they're going to have a little sharpness to them because they're going to have that mustard in the dredging. You don't want a whole lot of flour on these. We're not trying to bread them or anything. We're just trying to dredge them a little bit so they get a nice brown outside. So once those have been nicely dredged, we're just going to put those into a pan with some good hot melted butter. And you don't want to overcook these. You just want them to be just barely cooked. A little bit of browning on the outside, and that's perfect. And those are when those come out, they are going to be delicious. So you can see you've got a little bit of browning on one side. Just give those a little flip. And then once they're cooked all the way through, but not too cooked, you want to take them out. Now's a great time to taste and adjust the seasoning in your bisque. So we're going to give it a little taste while those little bundles of lobster are still frying. We're going to add our cream. We're going to adjust with a little tiny dash of vermouth and a little tiny dash of lemon juice as well. A little bit of tartness and acid sort of wakes up a lot of the flavors in there, makes it a little brighter. The flavors in the soup are very, very round and unctuous. So a tiny, tiny bit of acid, like lemon juice or even Tabasco sauce, if you want a little bit of spice, will help sort of bring everything out. Meanwhile, our nice little fried lobster bits are just about done, so we're going to take those, let them drain on a paper towel briefly, and then we're ready to serve. So we've got our bisque, so the bisque is going to hit the plate. You can see they've got that rich orangey red color from the beautiful lobster shells, and beautiful and thick. Again, not the traditional thickening method. We used a roux for this, but you can see how beautiful it's come out. And then we're going to garnish that with our nice little fried lobster. And don't be afraid to be generous, so we're going to put a few of these chunks of fried lobster on top. And then the final touch is going to be the green onion we showed you at the beginning. We're going to just cut that on a really long bias cut and give it a good garnish on top. And this is not just for looks. You actually, the sharpness of that onion, the green onion, is really going to bring a lot of flavor to this. So it's part of the dish. It's an important part. The flavor of those green onions really helps bring out some of the flavors in the soup as well. So we hope you give it a try, and that's it. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.